Welcome to another episode of the TA Table, the official podcast of the Teaching Assistants Training Program at the University of Toronto. We're your hosts, Elliot Fonarev and Estefania Toledo, and today we're talking about community engaged learning and students as partners in teaching as a pedagogical approach for fostering equity and creating liberating learning spaces. In this episode, Estefania talked to Dr. Leanne De Souza Kenny, assistant professor in the teaching stream in the Public Health and Human Biology programs at the University of Toronto. She's also the founder of Nutrition and Food Literacy Canada, a national alliance working to leverage food literacy for chronic disease prevention and social justice.
I'm really excited about this episode, Elliot. I had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Leanne D'Souza Kennedy, who's an assistant professor. So when I met with Leanne, one of the first things that I asked her was just to describe her teaching style and her goals for connecting with students in the classroom as well as in lab settings.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Leanne D'Souza Kenny. I am a daughter and sister, an immigrant, a wife and mother, a scientist and educator. In my teaching, I strive to create a classroom that fosters the learner on a path of becoming increasingly critically engaged and socially responsible citizens. I find deep meaning in adapting the problem-posing education as described by Paulo Freire, where there is praxis, education based on values, practicing what they preach, reflection and theory, as well as dialogue, shared ideas of what we learn and where students and teachers can talk to each other in meaningful ways based on mutual respect. And this way, the teacher is also the learner. And finally, conscientious learning, which is a reflexive practice and reflective practice where students can see and apply in real time their learning and their knowledge from the course that we have together, as well as their other learnings from other areas of their life. So my goals include fostering the classroom as a place of creativity, reflection, and action, such that students are not passive recipients of information, but rather active partners enacting literacy and therefore agency to change their lives and the lives of those around them. Bell Hooks said the classroom remains the most radical place for change in the university. And like Freire, who described the inequities and ineffectual practice of what he called the banking model of education, Bell Hooks also argued that education should not be a rote assembly line approach to learning, and instead should foster critical consciousness to challenge dominant ideologies and oppressive systems. So to dwell on these ideas of the classroom as the most radical space for change is for me this existential idea with enormous responsibility and consequence. And I have found that one accessible way to embark on the classroom as such a radical space for change is through community engaged learning and students as partners.
I'm glad we could speak more about community engaged learning at this time because we're in a moment where the Canadian government in 2019 shared that it's investing in experiential and work integrated learning initiatives. And there's a current mandate agreement that U of T has with the province that commits to a goal of providing every undergrad with at least one experiential learning or work integrated learning experience during the course of their studies. And community engaged learning is under that umbrella of experiential learning. We'll put a link in the show notes to U of T's Experiential Learning Hub, but this is just to say that there's really a lot of interest right now in experiential learning, both from the ground up, both from the institution and the province. So hope that this conversation brings you some more great tips for how to do that in your classroom.
I know that when we were planning this season, you and I made an intentional decision to really want to amplify those voices of STEM educators on campus, because a lot of the time when we're talking about pedagogy in this season, it can really be more towards the social sciences and humanities. And what we wanted to do this season is also just highlight a lot of the great work that happens in STEM. So one of the great things that Leanne shared with us is what brought her into this work. And she also provides us with a definition for students as partners, as well as community engaged learning to help anchor our conversation. And during our chat, we moved from the definition and what this means, and then move towards strategies for implementing this in a course design as well as assessments.
So for somebody who might want to try community engaged learning but doesn't know what it looks like in practice, how do they start?
Leanne shared some really great strategies. One of the things that Leanne mentioned is that it requires self-reflection and thinking about why we want to engage in this pedagogy. One of the things she cautioned against was just ticking the box and saying like, I'm going to do community engaged learning, check mark, students as partners, check mark. She really wants educators to be self-reflective as to what they're teaching, why they're teaching, and what brings them into this work. Leanne also talked about how she brings storytelling into the STEM classroom or into STEM learning spaces, which is very uncommon. So I thought it was like really innovative and really great as how she uses this approach to connect with learners.
So one thing I think is to do some self-reflection on what's meaningful for you as an educator. I'm not saying this in a preaching way. It's something I'm saying to myself as well. And when I do that, I would say that students as partners and community engaged learning doesn't just resonate with my teaching, but that it is my teaching. There are, sure, methods and tools, but they are also ideology and paradigm of how we ought to view students as partners, and that universities have a social responsibility to the communities that they are a part of, and therefore they must necessarily be community engaged. So what SAP, or Students as Partners, and CEL, Community Engaged Learning, provide are more than just frameworks, but rather the answer to what's missing, because students are in fact missing as active participants in their own learning. And the communities we talk about in classes are not just distant groups or topics and examples and case studies. They are themselves missing from our classroom. So if and when the higher learning educator recognizes education as emancipatory, then SAP and CEL are not mere tools, but instead vital appendages to the body of education. So some sort of low-hanging fruit, if you will, ways to include this in the classroom for me has been to incorporate reflexive and reflective practice. Imagine me in a biology classroom saying this to a group of budding biologists. Everybody's looking at me like I have three heads. But I frame that in the context that they're used to, a lecture. And then we have the practice of what would this look like? I give them one of my reflections, or I engage in some reflective practice in real time of what we're talking about and model it for them. And then we flip the classroom. They have some time as classic TATP strategy, think, pair, share. And after they do that, we flip the classroom. And we do this sometimes formally, and other times it's more informal, so that we can have the classroom discussions in small groups and larger groups, what's resonating for you, what's coming up for you, and they steer the conversation. It's a much more authentic form of teaching, I think, to be that guide on the side instead of the stage on the stage. And with CEL, thinking about sovereignty and self-determinism, we can talk about that with all kinds of academic references, but to think about what that actually means in terms of reducing inequities in tangible ways, elevating the voices of the underserved and underrepresented into the classroom, that's something that is much harder to do. So I try to frame it in three ways. One way that I'll bring that voice into the classroom, if I'm not able to engage directly with a community partner as a community and partnered course, is to make sure that we're talking about different community examples. So in addition to your academic references, scholarship, all those kinds of traditional ideas of what we do in the academy, I talk about the actual nonprofits and NGOs and the groups in the community, sometimes right outside the doors of the university, but sometimes further away or globally. And we use those as case studies. There are three key goals that I hope to achieve by bringing these voices into the classroom. One is that we have underrepresented voices, voices of people of color, people who are leaders in their community and working with underserved groups. Two is that we achieve some level of application as a form of experiential learning, where students consider ideas of others in the community who, as we speak, are enacting our course concepts in tangible and pragmatic ways. And three, I hope that these voices give exemplars of careers and fulfilling work that offer new ways of thinking about career planning for our students, especially in biology and medicine. They tend to be pre-med, pre-law, etc. So this is a low-touch form of experiential learning that anyone can do in their classroom, and perhaps it can inspire ideas for partnership and collaboration and higher touch community engaged learning. The key component of this activity is to offer multiple opportunities, multiple perspectives, and over time you'll see that they're become relational to each other as the course progresses. And to ensure that there's time for that reflexive practice in real time of what they're getting out of it in real time, and then reflective practice looking back as they consolidate learning from these experiences, as well as the other sources of information they're learning in their courses and from outside the course.
During our conversation, Leanne mentioned how community engaged learning, as well as students as partners, have the potential to transform higher education more broadly. So bringing this impact outside of the brick and mortar of our classrooms. So Leanne was really great at providing some tips on how to make this impact and have this reach beyond the university, which I think within students as partners and community engaged learning, there's this aspect of civic engagement. And I thought it was really great of how she talks about it, how she implements it in her assignments in the classroom and brings students along.
Yeah, this really connects to education in the university and education beyond civic engagement in the community. Let's hear more from Leanne about some strategies and tips about how to make this impact and reach beyond the university.
The modeling is important. When they see that you can do that or they see an example, they feel like they can see themselves in that. I'll often use personal anecdotes or storytelling. Storytelling is the opposite of what we do in science. However, if we think about science in action, so I try to help my students see that. If we think about science in action, what is it? It's not doing public lectures. It's no longer standing on a soapbox. It's actually engaging with people from other disciplines. And so that means that you might think that scientists should stay in their lane and policymakers, for example, should stay in their lane. But science in action, especially health science, is policy. So we have to find ways to communicate with one another. And offering that chance in the classroom is a way to say, hey, I'm giving us this opportunity to do this practice in the classroom, because where else are you going to get it? And I find that students are often thoughtful and take this opportunity to heart. When I open up to them my pedagogical goals and plans and what it is that I'm trying to achieve and why, they are curious. It's something new for them. They're not used to it. They start to consider the connections to their lived experiences as viable and valid. And validating someone's personal lived experiences as they relate to their education is somehow a gift and rare. It shouldn't be, but somehow it is. And learning from other disciplines and connecting those to various course concepts is liberating. I find that students seem very liberated to move beyond the course concepts and the ideas of what might be in a rubric or be evaluated and start to imagine what this actually means, what this knowledge actually means to them outside of the course and beyond university. We therefore tap into this richer discussion of meaningful conversation about course concepts and curriculum in authentic ways. And suddenly we have something that is also a rare gift in the classroom: humanity. And at times, there may be resistance for students who have become indoctrinated by testing as a central form of assessments and rubrics and grades. But they usually become awakened to what is missing from their own education through multiple sessions of this type of approach, where we just hold space in the classroom so that it becomes tradition. It becomes culture of our classroom to hold space for this type of dialogue and this openness to explore in real time. It is like a giant reflexive practice to be in a course together. And students truly become partners in their own learning, and of course, in the eventual partnerships that we have with one another and with the community beyond when we can bring them into the classroom. I suppose I could say one more word about the key challenges around implementing, because I know that was one of the components to this idea of the challenges and resistance, and that could be around grading. But I really do believe that there's little productivity in evaluating someone's reflections and personal thoughts on ideas, especially the new ones from perspectives that we bring into a classroom that has not usually had that, or to students who have not usually been able to engage in that way. And so, one way to disarm all those fears is to make students understand that we're inviting you into a conversation. And this conversation is, in order for it to be authentic, I cannot evaluate it on a GPA scale, but rather I invite you to engage, and we can count this towards your engagement grades. We are not going to evaluate what you say in terms of a grade. And students tend to appreciate this kind of notion of authenticity and honesty and transparency. And they naturally demonstrate higher engagement when they have that opportunity. And one way to prepare students is to begin by setting expectations on the course that there will be this open dialogue, an opportunity to collectively shape the culture of our classroom and to invite them into this dialogue and collaboration, which must include self-examination and partnership with each other. And of course, there will be some who are just really great at vocalizing and expressing themselves. And so they will lead and tend to be the first ones to speak. But eventually, when you get a couple of them bringing out some ideas to celebrate their ideas or to use them as the examples or something that they said as an example, it's energizing, it's reassuring and affirming to them, almost like you would see in K to 12 education, and to bring some of that culture back in. You're not a student number, but you're a part of this community. When it comes to students as partners and community engaged learning, what it offers you is the ability to be really inspiring for students from the inside out. So remember that I said earlier that we can become uninspired from the inside and internally, and that's a sure way to extinguish our dreams. Well, in the social justice classroom, when we leverage students as partners in CEL to foster both external and internal inspiration, in fact, we are helping students with this fantasy that they walked into the proverbial and literal doors of higher education expecting to engage with, but then we squash their sense of wonder with rubrics and cutoffs and unproductive competition and a rules-based form of banking education model that Freire warned us against. And instead, if every class could make a connection to students and to community, through those examples, case study analyses, classroom conversation, breakout group activities, etc., then we can tap into something that is deep within our students, and that is their true potential to find purpose. The reason these tools are viable and even more than that, necessary as part of a paradigm shift is because we are actively doing the work of thinking about how we can change our lives and the lives of those around us through the knowledge gained in the classroom. In this way, students achieve true literacy. That is that knowledge that gives them the agency to use and apply in their lives. And if students can do this thinking in class, in the classroom community, with the teacher, through 12 weeks of the semester, they can consolidate knowledge in meaningful ways along with their other learnings from courses, work, volunteerism, extracurriculars, etc. And now we have citizens with the responsibility, the skills, the dedication, and sense of self that are prerequisites to being agents of change in their communities.
We closed off the conversation with Leanne offering some tips for educators who want to explore these ideas further, and also shared some resources on how to integrate this into your practice.
I believe that reading the work of the great educators you're influenced by is really powerful. Those you admire, those you are curious about, those who may not seem like they fit neatly into your discipline, but instead they are people who speak to your why. That is your purpose, the version of you that was hungry to change the world, and somehow teaching became the vehicle. And recognizing that there's a disconnect between teaching as a career versus pedagogy as a calling, a vocational calling to something. And what is that? For me, some of these resources have included embracing the work of Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks, who I've commented on in our conversation today, as educators who, in my discipline of biology and medicine, I would never come across except by accident, as I have. But they became my mentors and opened a gateway to other scholars and change makers who recognize the tremendous responsibility and potential of an awakened education. And especially for those of us who, in the teaching world, will therefore hold some power to leverage education instead to change the world. It won't fit on your reading list. It won't fit on your progression through the ranks. It won't necessarily fit your disciplinary practice. None of these things in obvious ways at first. But your rights and responsibilities as an educator is to make the connection to your own personal and professional life. And this is where I believe you'll find your true legacy. It's really about thinking back to your why and your purpose in teaching.
So that's it for this episode.
It was so great to hear from Dr. D'Souza Kenny about how classrooms can shift away from what Freire calls the banking model of education and towards a more collaborative, reflective, and engaged learning environment that is bringing civic engagement into the classroom and bringing the classroom into the world.
It was really great to have Dr. Leanne D'Souza Kenny join us. I learned so much about community engaged learning, and also as a way for me to reflect on my own pedagogy. And as I'm building courses in the future, could this be something that I can look into? This brings us also to the end of our season. It was such a wonderful way to talk about pedagogy and how that can influence belonging and student experiences in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in. We hope that you enjoyed this season of the TA Table.
We want to take a moment to thank the amazing staff at the TATP, Mike, Chris, and Allie, who have supported this podcast, as well as recognize that the music on this podcast was created by Ali Diskin. We also want to send a special thanks to Kat Kochani, who supports us with editing and sound production.
We are your hosts, Elliot Fonarev and Estefania Toledo.
Thanks for joining us in this season. Until next time.